Maybe I can do a quick survey before we get started. How many people are already running an entrepreneurship program inside their organization? About a third of you, okay. How many of those have been going longer than 1 year already? Okay, good. And would the others say you are looking towards implementing entrepreneurship? Maybe, yeah, okay. Did any of you submit challenge to the conference? They gave you the opportunity to submit the challenge, right? Did anyone do that? A few of you. What I found, I searched all those challenges, I searched all the text and found it really interesting that only 2 people used the word entrepreneurship. So I don't know what that means. Either everyone's already super familiar with it and already moved on to other things, or it's just not there yet, or we're using other words to describe it. Okay, I think we can slowly get started, right? So I have 20 minutes. This is going to be quite quick. I'm already impressed that more than 5 people turned up, so thank you for that. I normally do this talk with Henning Trio, Head of Corporate Innovation at Bayer. Today it's just me. He wasn't able to make it. But that means there's going to be less conversation, obviously, because I can't talk to myself. So I have more slides and information to share with you. So today we're going to look at de-risking innovation journeys and how Bayer has been applying entrepreneurship as one of the innovation strategies that they have been using alongside many other strategies as well. So many of these other things they've been doing, I'm sure you're doing as well. But specifically what I will share with you is everything around entrepreneurship. And before I dive into it, I want to kind of set the playing field and let you know what was Bayer's vision before doing this. So they were very much saying that the purpose of their corporate innovation team was to empower the 117,000 employees at Bayer to innovate in what we do. Okay, so take innovation outside of R&D. They decided that product innovation alone was not enough. They needed to focus on new business models and new processes. And in order to do that, they decided that they needed to empower entrepreneurship, so the entrepreneurial mindset and the spirit. That then filtered down into identifying 3 methodologies that they felt they should focus on: creativity, customer focus, and experimentation. Creativity was very much focused around systematic inventive thinking. They used a company from Israel to do that, SIT. They then advanced into customer centricity, so that was design thinking methodologies, and for experimentation, applying lean startup and agile. And what's interesting is not trying to do it all at once, but applying them in that order as innovation projects went through a structured process. They also felt it was important to train coaches and ambassadors to help them internally further spread that methodology, and to systematically invest in ideas as they were becoming de-risked. So they used a venture capital investment strategy. And to help them do this, they looked for external partners. Many companies try to do this by themselves. I think that can work, but the people I see do that take a long time before they get results, and often their initiatives are killed off before they really come into fruition. So Bayer filtered out 100 innovation agencies, did a request for proposal with 39, then employed 8 to work for 3 months with various teams, and then narrowed it down to 2. That's myself with Academy for Corporate Entrepreneurship, and Strategizer, the creators of the business model canvas by Alexander Osterwalder. So together we collaborate to implement the programs. Where do they apply entrepreneurship? They apply it across all 3 horizons. Some of the entrepreneurship programs are more on the incremental level, and some are more on the disruptive level. And that, of course, impacts the design of the program. But really, it doesn't matter what horizon you're in. The question you want to ask yourself is, how many unknowns are there? How different is this project going to be versus what we've done before? The more unknowns you have, the more risky that journey becomes, and the more necessary it is to de-risk that. And if we look at innovation and entrepreneurship, at the end of the day, what it is a journey, right? And it's a very risky journey. It starts with high levels of enthusiasm. People are very happy during the ideation phase. They love brainstorming and getting to grips with ideas. But as reality sets in, we enter what's called the trough of sorrow. So we have to be very adamant that innovation is not a one-day workshop, right? It's not a 2-day workshop, and it's not a 5-day workshop. It's something that happens over a long period of time, and you need different tools, different methodologies at different stages along that journey. And that's something we're going to touch on. So there's 5 things that I want to share with you in this talk today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to structure programs, how to identify and select people to come into those programs, how to offer a testing environment to run experiments, what type of guidance is necessary, and scalability. And we found that these are the main factors that cause programs to either succeed, or if you don't have them, to fail. And they can make a big difference in the overall ROI of your investment. So structuring the innovation journey. Before Bayer got started, they decided to focus on these 4 phases. The first job was to identify teams and ideas that can come into the program. So it's kind of a pre-program selection phase. Then a discovery phase was designed to find problem solution fit. So are we really solving a real problem for a real customer in a feasible way? Is there potentially a business model here that can work for our organization? Whether that's for internal projects that get implemented internally and your customer is internal, or external out in the marketplace. And then there's a stage gate before we decide to move forward and incubate the project. That would mean building the actual solution and finding out technically, can we build it? Is it feasible? Can we build it in a way that makes sense for our customers? Can we find product market fit before we go ahead and launch to the market? And obviously the goal is always to get to launch. And there's a big valley of death in the middle, right? Because quite often we jump prematurely into incubation, building the solution, and the project end up rolling back down the slope in the valley of death and never really got to live its life. So this structure relates quite well to the journey we were describing earlier. The ideation phase, discovery, then incubation to find product market fit, and then launch. So you've got to think about it from a journey perspective. How do we support our entrepreneurs? What structures do we need to guide them on that journey? If I give you an example of a portfolio, because Bayer were taking a VC portfolio approach, we can compare a typical approach that we see out there. And yeah, this is a very good slide to take a picture of. I think it's very fundamental versus the AfCE approach and Bayer approach, right? So typically, if I look at the top line, you start off with many ideas, often too many ideas. And that's a result of using ideation software and brainstorming techniques. Many companies don't do a very rigorous or structured discovery phase. So we're not filtering out ideas early enough. We're pushing them straight into incubation because management got excited that it aligns with technology goals. And they think, let's go ahead and build the solution. And here we're typically investing around 200,000 euros per idea to start building the idea. And we might even assign a full-time team or a team that are working 50%. So that's a 2 million investment right there. And the result tends to be only one project getting launched. 10% will actually go to market. And that in itself is also just a pilot. And if you only have one project being launched, how much chance do you have that that project will now survive the next 2 to 5 years to actually become a scale-up? Very unlikely. So the approach we applied was, let's try to increase the quality of ideas early. So we only need 30 ideas in order to put 10 of those ideas into a discovery phase and give them some room to breathe and find out, are they really solving a real problem for a real customer? And then we're seeing 60% of those projects convert to incubation. So we already killed off 4. We learned that 4 are not going to work. Therefore, we only need to invest 1.2 million in that phase instead of the 2 million previously. So overall, we can calculate this. We're actually already saving 350,000 right off the bat, even though we funded a discovery phase. And now I'm getting 3 projects come into launch. 3 projects are launched. And now I've got not all my eggs in one basket, right? I've got 3 chances that one of those can become a scale up, which is really going to pay me back over time. So I can give you some real numbers here. When we look at batches from 120 ideas, we can put 40 teams into the discovery phase, 24 teams then convert into incubation, and 12 teams launch. And you might repeat that once, twice a year, or apply it in different areas of the organization. And looking at the amount of time teams are investing, you only need 20% time for this discovery phase. If you can increase it when they're in the incubation phase, that makes sense. up to 50%, but it doesn't have to be a full-time team. And then when it goes to launch, you want a lot of those original team members involved as they're building out the team. The team might then become 20 people instead of 4 to 6 people. So the conversion rates from each phase are 30% into discovery, 60% are getting into incubation, and 50% are then getting into launch. And that's what really matters in your entrepreneurship program. So if you can take this data, compare it back to what are you getting across your different phases, I think you might find there might be room for improvement. Okay, let's talk a little bit about people. Who's an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs are not necessarily just because you have a certain job title or because you are the most senior person in a certain division. You have to look at the entrepreneurial traits. So they typically like to learn from experience. They like to analyze data and recognize patterns. They're good at building strategic relationships within the organization. They like to assume responsibility. They don't mind working overtime or working on their passion project during the weekend. They're highly adaptable and they're good at interacting with people. So there's actually a test that you can apply that helps you figure out, do people in the innovation team or whoever's being selected have this criteria? And that is being used to create more awareness across innovation managers as to what is the talent pool that they currently have in order to run entrepreneurship projects with. And we found that people that, when they score low on this test, they make the team dysfunctional. Those teams do not tend to succeed when we have people that have scored higher on the test. So we've ran programs with and without the test, and we found there's a 40% difference in terms of the performance. So it's a really cheap thing to do up front, but it can have a high impact on the overall ROI of your innovation project. And just to make it very clear about seniority, right? As seniority goes up, so from left to right, the Allianz on the right did entrepreneurship with very senior people versus Kluber. The entrepreneurial fit became less and less, right? So only 26% of the Allianz people in the program were a good fit versus 54% from Kluber who were less senior. Okay, so there's real evidence there to show there's no correlation between seniority and being a good fit for entrepreneurship. Might be the guy that joined your organization yesterday, right? That could be a better fit. Okay, let's move on and talk about testing. Testing is really about watching out for hippos. Anyone familiar with the phrase hippo? Should be a little bit highest person paid opinion, right? And that's how a lot of innovation decisions get made. Whoever is earning the biggest salary, the most senior person, is often making the decision. And they're often making the decision based on gut feeling. And it's not to say their gut feeling hasn't been informed over their years of experience, but unless they're super experienced in launching startups or new initiatives, you want to be making decisions based on data. So we've heard a lot of these comments inside organizations, right? Especially within Bayer, legal restrictions make it hard for us to directly interact with customers. So we have to use expensive third parties, and often we miss out on the context. So the people who are actually in the innovation team are not learning what their customers are saying to them. We don't have anybody who can do Facebook or Google ads to drive traffic to our test pages. So they were struggling to find data from their customers and test customer behavior because they had to go through all these other procedures and processes. So what we did was created a prototype fund that they could use that would give them access immediately to designers, developers, online marketers, and project manager that puts this all together. So whenever they wanted to do a clickable app or design a landing page, now even do 3D printing and do hardware designs of products that might not be digital, they can get prototypes and prototypes and MVPs of this to support their experiments so they can quickly turn around data and make decisions. So that money is set aside. There's no sign-off, there's no approval, there's no asking for permission. They can just go ahead and use the services that they need. And that helps them collect a lot of data. Here's a selection of all the different types of lean startup experiments that they might be running. So they just discuss with their mentor which one is the most applicable and can go ahead and do it straight away. Okay, let's talk about guidance. Tough love from mentors who have been there, done that. Often we're seeing that companies are relying on internal staff, so more senior staff to guide these innovation processes who are, to be honest, fairly stuck in their way. they are not often, escaping tunnel vision, kind of biased as well. And a lot of politics comes into play. So we found that it's very important, the more external guidance teams can get, the better they move towards, what is the truth in terms of the customer and the evidence that's being created. So their job is really to transfer the skill for talent development. They transfer the entrepreneurial mindset to the employee because they themselves come from a startup and corporate innovation background. So it's a rare breed of person that doesn't just understand one world, corporate side or the startup side, they understand both, and they can really bring it together and empathize with the team, but keep the team on the straight and narrow, right? So they don't really care if your project succeeds or not. They have no interest in it, right? In terms of they have no stake. So all they care about is the process and the entrepreneur following the process and finding the evidence, really, because the evidence should speak for itself. And they're really down in the trenches working with the team side by side. Guidance can also be the material that you provide, right? So you heard about Kickbox, I think, yesterday. Mark is here. Bayer also commissioned us to improve the original Kickbox program because the conversion rate of people getting up to level 6 was very low. So we implemented a lot of this guidance from our other programs into Kickbox. And that might be supported with e-learning methodology, right? So interactive e-learning that teaches some of the fundamentals around entrepreneurship, where you can get feedback, drag and drop exercises, case studies about design thinking. You can see how it has been applied in other companies. Already teaching you about assumptions and why it's important to test assumptions, and making this available, right, across devices so people can easily, absorb the content maybe on their way to work. And then combining all of this with mentors meeting the teams physically as well, at the beginning, middle, and towards the end of projects, and carrying that through in the virtual environment. So they're not just sent off into the wilderness to get on and come back 3 months, 6 months later to report back on their findings. They're actually being guided on a weekly basis, and that helps to keep them on track. They're able to watch out for engagement levels and mindset levels when working with the team. So they can fill in evaluations that we can report back to the sponsor. And the reason why this becomes very important is because for the next step, you actually want to identify who are the best entrepreneurs because they can then become the internal coaches and ambassadors. So when it comes to scaling, right, we actually now have an infrastructure that we can work from. It wasn't just a one-off project and now everyone goes back to their own jobs. We're seeing people be promoted into innovation roles as a result. So we can implement train the trainer to develop innovation mentors. So it's one thing to have a lot of Steve Jobs, right? Great innovators, great entrepreneurs. But it's another thing to then have a lot of Paul Grahams, the guy that runs Y Combinator and actually mentors and coaches many other entrepreneurs. And this is how some of the big programs like inside Intuit. Intuit was one of the first companies to really apply lean startup to the corporate environment and grow an innovation catalyst network that really helped change the culture of that company. Actually, the background of this slide is the Intuit stock price going up as they were implementing more and more of these types of innovation programs. So at Bayer, they're now training this network of innovation coaches who have had the experience and can now go and train other people. Not 100%, but it means they need less of the external mentoring. And where we're at now in Bayer is really to transform the company to create this culture of innovation, is making the innovation tools that they've been using accessible to everyone, not just the very few teams that made it into a specific program. But if you're working, I don't know, with a product team or a design team, or maybe you are in R&D and you want to develop more business model related ideas, you can now gain access through their internal system where it's like an internal Amazon, right? They use Ariba SmartBuy, where they can actually search for services, consulting services, mentoring services, basically anything that we've been using inside Bayer, even if it's just to set up a landing page or get one of those experiments run. A team can go into this online catalog, find a service and book it without going through a procurement procedure. As long as the manager approves it, it goes through because it's already been pre-approved in the background, right? Because they've tried and tested these services and now they can make it available to everyone. So that's something that now in the next year is going to really help go from just having the core central innovation team from corporate trying to push these programs out to the different countries. When you're not in a program, you can actually use a lot of these services to help your innovation project. So in summary, we've touched on structure, we've touched on people, testing, guidance, scalability, and I'm literally just scratching the tip of the iceberg, right, on these topics. But these seem to be the 5 topics that make the difference between an entrepreneurship program either succeeding or failing. So I just ask you today to maybe think about, how could you improve your innovation strategy? A lot of you told me you already have an innovation program. What could be improved? Those of you looking to get started, make sure you design it in the right way so you don't repeat a lot of the mistakes that other people have been making, because it can take years to recover from those mistakes. And if you don't start showing ROI earlier, it becomes harder to keep the entrepreneurship initiative alive. And I think entrepreneurship is one of those key strategies now that organizations need. So that's all for my talk today. I think I'm within time. I want to introduce you to my colleagues Melise and Arnout, who are at the back. So if you are interested to have questions afterwards, I think we'll be hanging around a bit in this room while there's 10 minutes to finish breakfast and get to the next meeting. And if you want to come and talk to us in more detail, we're hosting 2 roundtables today. I think we're number 4 for the first one. So if you want to come and discuss with other people who are running programs, that would be really interesting. Or one-on-one, come and visit us at the booth, and I can share more information about what we're doing inside Bayer and other clients as well. Okay, thank you very much.